I was the one they ordered to write the lie, and I wrote it, and it is carved now into the long black wall of the great hall where every child of the kingdom will read it for 1,000 years, and every word of it is false. I have spent the better part of my life as the king's remembrancer, the keeper of what is written down, and therefore the keeper of what is remembered, and I learned in that office a thing that no one tells you when they hand you the seal, that the past is not what happened. The past is what is written, and what is written is decided by the living, and the living, almost always, decide on the version that serves them. I decided on the version that served them too. I was a coward in the ordinary way that most of us are cowards, which is to say I told myself that the lie was kindness, that the people needed it, that the truth would only wound, and I carved it, beautiful and false, into the black wall, and I let it become the past. I am very old now, and I will not last much longer, and I find that I cannot go into the dark leaving only the lie behind me. So I have done, in secret, in my last years, the thing I should have done at the first. I have gathered the truth. I have sat with everyone still living who was there, the great and the small, the guilty and the grieving, and I have taken down their voices, and I have woven them here into a single account that no wall will ever carry, that may never be read by anyone, that exists only so that somewhere, even in a hidden thing, even in the dark, the real story is set down. They will tell you, from the black wall, that the Princess Rowan died gloriously in the breaking of the line at the Hallows, that she fell with her face to the enemy and her name on the lips of her soldiers, and that the long war we fought afterward was holy because it was waged in her sacred memory. That is the lie I carved, and it is a magnificent lie, and I was proud of the carving once. The truth is stranger, and smaller, and far more terrible. The truth is that she did not die at the Hallows at all. The truth is that almost everyone who mattered would have been happier, richer, and safer if she had. And the truth is that the only reason she came home alive is that a tired foreigner from beyond the rim, who had never in his life heard the sacred law that said she was already dead, picked her up out of a field and would not put her down. Let me give you the voices. I have arranged them as best an old scribe can. Begin where it began for us, at the gate, in the gray hour, with the first person to see the impossible thing walking up the southern road. Begin with Ferris because Ferris saw it first, and because an old gate guard who has stood the same watch for 40 years is the most honest witness a chronicler could pray for. He wants nothing. He is owed nothing. He is too old and too plain to have learned how to shape a story toward his own advantage. He simply tells you what crossed his line of sight, in the order it crossed, and lets you make of it what you will. I have come to treasure men like Ferris more than I treasure kings. It was the gray hour, he told me, the worthless dead hour before dawn, when nothing comes to a city gate but bad news and drunks, and the occasional desperate refugee from a war that had by then been eating the South for the better part of a year. 11 months it had been since the Hallows. 11 months into the holy war we were fighting in the dead princess's name. The kingdom had long since finished mourning her in the loud way, the public way of black banners and tolling bells, and had settled into the other kind of mourning, the permanent quiet kind that does not end and does not heal, but simply becomes the new shape of a place. Her tomb was finished and sealed. Her shrine was thronged from dawn to dark with the grieving and the praying. Her young face, for she had been young, far too young, looked out from the war banners over every gate and every muster field in the realm. And Ferris was leaning on his pike in the cold of the gray hour, half asleep on his feet the way a man is after 40 years of the same watch, when a shape came up the empty southern road out of the burned country, and the shape was wrong, and for a long moment he could not say to himself why. It was wrong, he realized slowly, because it was a single figure on foot, alone and carrying something, and people did not come up that road on foot and alone anymore. Not from the South. The South was ash. The South was where the war had gone and eaten everything down to the roots. Nothing walked out of the South on foot in the gray hour, nothing living and certainly nothing alone. Yet here it came, slow and steady and ruined, into the reach of his torchlight, and as it resolved he saw that it was a stranger, not one of our own kind at all, but one of the soft, pale, upright creatures from beyond the rim that we had all heard tell of and few of us had ever seen with our own eyes. A human, ragged past the point of clothing, gray from crown to foot with the dust of a road longer than Ferris could imagine, starved so thin that the torchlight seemed to pass half through him. And lashed across his back, bound there with strips torn from his own garments, was a person, carried the particular way you carry someone who can no longer carry any part of themselves, dead weight made bearable only by lashing it to your own frame. He had clearly been carrying her like that for a very long time. Ferris is precise about this, and his precision is the thing that breaks me whenever he tells it. The straps had cut grooves into the stranger's shoulders, raw weeping grooves worn over older scarred-over grooves, the record of a burden carried not for hours but for weeks. And the man walked with the specific gait of one who has gone so far past the end of his own strength that the walking has become involuntary, a thing the body does now without permission, because stopping has become more frightening than continuing. He did not walk like a man arriving. He walked like a man who had forgotten arriving was possible, and was simply, still, putting one foot down and then the other, as he had been doing for so long that it was no longer travel but a condition of being alive. Ferris challenged him, because that is the whole of a gate guard's office, and he had done it 40 years, and his mouth made the words before his stunned mind could catch up. And the stranger stopped gratefully, Ferris thought, as though the challenge were permission to stop that he had been too stubborn to give himself, and he was too far gone for speech, or nearly. What he managed in the rough, careful trade tongue that the rim folk learn was only this, and Ferris has repeated it to me so many times, always word for word, that I believe it is carved deeper in him than the official lie is carved in the wall. I think this one's yours. She kept asking for her mother. I'd rather not have carried her this far to hand her to the wrong door. And then he turned. With the very last of whatever was holding him upright, he turned his body, slow and careful, so that the torchlight would fall on the face of the person lashed to his back. And Ferris looked. Ferris, who had buried 2 of his own sons in this very war. Ferris, who passed the princess's shrine every dawn on his way to the gate and touched the stone for luck the way the whole city did. Ferris, who saluted that young face on the banner above his own head every single morning of his life. Ferris looked at the hollowed, scarred, barely breathing face of the person on the stranger's back, and made a sound, he told me, that he has never made before or since. A sound he did not know was in him, because the face was the face on the banner, the face from the sealed tomb, the face of the Princess Rowan, dead 11 months and mourned by a kingdom. And her eyes were open. And in the torchlight they moved, and they found his, and she knew him. She knew the old gate guard. She had ridden past him 1,000 times in her living years, and she knew him. And with what little she had left she tried and failed and tried again to say his name. That is where it began for us. A sound in the gray hour at the gate, an old man dropping his pike, and a dead girl trying to say his name. Everything else I have gathered radiates outward from that single moment like the rings from a stone dropped into still black water. But the stone was thrown long before the gate, and I must take you back to it now, back 11 months to the Hallows, to the day she was made dead, because the rot at the center of this whole sorrowful thing lives there in that day, and it took me years and a great deal of patience to find a voice brave enough and broken enough to tell me what truly happened. The voice belongs to a soldier named Asa, who stood beside her when the line broke, and who has not slept one whole night through since. The official account, the account I carved on the black wall with my own coward's hand, says that the line at the Hallows broke under an overwhelming assault, and that the Princess Rowan held the gap alone until she fell, and that her death bought the retreat that saved the army. Half of that is true, and the true half is what made the lie so easy to build, because the best lies are mostly true. The line did break. She did hold the gap. She was that kind, the kind who throws herself into the breach, The kind a kingdom is fortunate to produce one of in a generation and foolish enough to spend cheaply in a war it never needed to fight. The soldiers loved her for it, and they were right too. But Asa told me the part the account leaves out, and he told me with his whole face turned to the wall of his little room, because he could not say it to me with his eyes on mine, and I did not make him. When the line broke and the princess was cut off in the gap with a small knot of soldiers, Asa among them, the order came down from the rear to fall away, to abandon the gap, abandon the cutoff, and reform the line further back. Now that order by itself is no crime. It is the cold and ancient arithmetic of war, and our people have a custom built precisely for it, a hard and sacred custom that I had believed in without question my whole life, the rule of the sundered. Those who are cut off beyond a broken line, taken by the closing of a gap, are given to the field. We do not go back for them. We do not send the living into a closed gap to claw back the already lost, because that is the surest way ever devised to turn one death into 50. We sing the sundered as glorious dead. We honor them with the most beautiful rites we have, and we do not, we never, on pain of the deepest shame our culture knows, go back. It is a wise custom. I want to keep saying that, because it would be easy now, knowing what I know, to call it monstrous, and it is not monstrous. It is the accumulated battlefield wisdom of 1,000 years, and it has saved more of our soldiers than any weapon ever forged, and the man or woman who breaks it to chase the lost has historically gotten a great many living people killed for the sake of a corpse. So when the order came, Asa and the others fell away, and they did it with clean consciences, because the rule of the sundered had already done its gentle, terrible work. The instant the princess was cut off, she was, by our deepest law, no longer a person to be saved but a song to be sung. She was already dead. Going back for her was not even a temptation, because the custom had removed it from the realm of the thinkable. That is what custom does, at its best and at its worst. It decides in advance what we are even able to consider. But Asa saw two things, falling back through the smoke, that the custom does not account for and cannot absorb, and those two things are the worm in the apple of everything. The first thing he saw was that the princess was not dead. She was down, she was badly wounded, but she was moving, she was alive in the gap and would remain alive for some while yet, long enough that under any law but ours she might have been reached, might have been pulled out, might have been saved. The custom says the sundered are dead. The custom is, sometimes, simply wrong, and the wrongness is hidden by the speed with which we begin to sing. And the second thing Asa saw, glancing back, was who had given the order to fall away, and how fast it had come. It had not come from the field commander on the spot, weighing the gap with a soldier's eye. It had come from further back, from the staff of the war-chancellor, Lord Grieve, and it had come almost before the gap had finished closing, before any real attempt to hold the breach had been made, before the situation could possibly have been assessed by anyone who could see it. Asa, lying awake every night for 11 months and then for years more, turning it over and over in the dark, has come to believe what I too have come to believe, slowly and against my will, because I did not want it to be true and could not make it untrue. The order was not arithmetic, the order was opportunity. The Princess Rowan, alive, was a problem for certain powerful people. She was beloved by the army and the common folk in a way that made her dangerous. She was willful and she was young, and she had set herself openly against the wider war that Grieve's faction hungered for. She thought it ruinous. She said so, and her saying so carried weight. A living Rowan would one day be a queen impossible to steer. But a dead Rowan, a Rowan cut off, sundered, sung, made into a martyr, would be the single most useful thing in the kingdom. You would not even have to kill her. Killing leaves a body, leaves evidence, leaves a question. You would only have to invoke the sacred custom a little too quickly, give the order to fall away a half-beat too soon, decline to hold a gap that might have been held, and then let the field do what the field does to the sundered, and the most beloved obstacle in the realm would transform, without a single accusing fingerprint upon it, into the realm's most powerful banner. Because the rule of the sundered, that wise and ancient and beautiful custom, makes deliberate abandonment look exactly, precisely, indistinguishably like grief. So they gave her to the field, and for 11 months the field had her in the kingdom's mind, and the kingdom mourned and raged and went to war in her name. But the field, this one time, in this one impossible instance, did not actually take her, because a stranger was walking in the field. A stranger who had never heard the rule of the sundered, and so was the one creature in all that burned country still free to do the unthinkable thing. And here, at the very heart of my account, I come to the great wound of my whole long labor, the thing that has frustrated me and haunted me through all my years of gathering. The figure at the absolute center of the truest story our kingdom has ever lived is the one figure I could never fully gather, because he would not be gathered, because he left. The stranger, the human, vanished before the court could thank him, before it could reward him, before it could question him, before it could even decide what manner of thing he was. He has never been found. And so the man at the dead center of everything is, in my account, a whole, a shape I have been forced to reconstruct entirely from the where he left on the edges of other people. The way a sculptor's apprentice rebuilds a stolen statue from the worn place it left on its pedestal and the dust line on the floor. This is what I have managed to assemble of him, and I offer it knowing it is incomplete, knowing it will always be incomplete, knowing that the incompleteness is itself perhaps the truest thing about him. He was a human, a foreigner from one of the wandering vessels that passed the rim of our space, a trader, some say, or a surveyor of dead worlds, or simply a drifter. The accounts differ, and he never settled the question, because he was never asked it by anyone he chose to answer. He had no stake whatsoever in our war. He was not on our side, for the plain reason that he was not on any side. The very notion of our sides meant nothing to a creature from beyond the rim. He had been somewhere in the burned south for reasons that have died with his absence, when the Hallows happened, and afterward, picking his way, perhaps, through the ruin of a battle that was nothing to him, on his way to somewhere that was nothing to us. He came upon a wounded princess of a species not his own, abandoned by her own people in a closed gap, dying alone in the field. And he did not leave. I have turned this over more in my last years than I have turned over anything in my entire life, because it is the exact seam where the human and our kind come apart, the precise line of cleavage, and I find I cannot go to my grave without at least pressing my thumb against it and feeling its shape. Any of our people, any of us, the best of us, the kindest and bravest of us, finding her there, would have understood at once and in our bones that she was sundered, given to the field, already a song, already owed nothing further by the living, and we would have honored that. We would have, at the very most, eased her passing with what mercy we could and gone on our way, carrying no guilt, because the custom had already absolved us before we arrived. That is not cruelty. I have to keep insisting on this against my own grief. That is wisdom, hard, clean, 1,000-year-old wisdom about death and war, and the limits of what the living can be asked to owe the lost. The stranger had no such wisdom. He had never heard the rule of the sundered. No one had ever sat him down and explained to him that a person cut off behind a broken line is already, by sacred law, a corpse. And so he was not bound by it, and a creature who is not bound by the story is capable of things that the story makes the rest of us literally unable to imagine, things that do not even rise to the level of choices we decline, because we never see them as choices at all. He looked at a dying foreign princess in a field, and in the absence of any law telling him she was already dead, he saw only what was in front of his eyes, a person alive who needed help. So he helped. He stayed with her, there in the burned south behind a war, with no supplies, no shelter, no cause, no kinship, and no reason that any of our people has ever been able to name. He kept a dying foreign princess alive. For weeks, the state of her wounds, when she finally reached us, told the court physicians it could only have been weeks, while by every reckoning she should have died a dozen times over, he kept her breathing. How, we do not fully know. He scavenged, he tended. He did the patient, brutal work of keeping a broken body on the living side of the line, alone, in a place that wanted them both dead. And then, when she was strong enough to survive being moved but nowhere near strong enough to move herself, he bound her to his back with strips of his own clothing and he began to walk north, across an entire season of active war. Through the ash of the burned country, past the edges of armies, toward a kingdom that was not his, to a gate he had never seen, to deliver her to a mother he had never met. Because, as best anyone can tell, she had asked him to take her to her mother, and he had decided that this was a thing he would do. The court, afterward, frantic to make sense of him, asked him the only question that has ever mattered in this whole story, the question I have spent my final years asking the empty shape where he stood. Why? Why would a stranger, with no cause and no kin and no hope of reward, keep alive and then carry across a war a person who was nothing to him, toward a kingdom that was nothing to him? And the answers they remember him giving are all small, and all maddening, and all, I have become certain of this, completely and literally true, because he was too tired and too plain a creature to have invented anything grander. To the king, who pressed him for his reason, the stranger said only that she had been alive, and he had not been, so far as he knew, in the habit of leaving alive people lying in fields. To the queen mother, who fell weeping before him and begged to know how she could ever begin to repay such a thing, he seemed honestly confused by the question, as though repayment belonged to a category of ideas that did not apply, and what he finally said was something about how she had kept apologizing to him. The whole way north, he said, the princess, drifting in and out, half mad with pain and fever, had kept apologizing to him, for being heavy, for slowing him down, for being a burden on a stranger who owed her nothing. And you do not, the human said, with what those present remember as a kind of baffled finality, as though stating a law of the world so obvious it embarrassed him to say it aloud. You do not leave behind someone who is using the last of their strength to apologize for being heavy. And to Ferris, at the gate, before any of the great ones got their hands on him, he had already said the truest version of it, the version I believe was the whole and entire engine of the thing. I'd rather not have carried her this far to hand her to the wrong door, as though the carrying itself had never once been in question, as though, the moment he picked her up out of that field, the possibility of setting her down anywhere short of home had simply ceased to exist as a thing a person could do. He would take no reward. He would take no title, no land, no place at court, no monument, nothing the grateful and frightened kingdom tried to press upon him, and we tried hard, because we badly needed him to become the hero the story required, the clean and noble savior we could carve beside the lie on the black wall. He refused all of it. He stayed only as long as it took to be certain she would live and would be received and would reach her mother's arms. And then, in another gray hour, he walked back out through the same gate he had walked in by, alone on foot, south, toward the rim and whatever life he had left behind to do this. Ferris watched him go and called after him to ask his name, because the kingdom would want it, would need it, would want to carve it somewhere golden. And the stranger, without breaking his stride, said over his shoulder that his name was Caleb, and that he hadn't really done anything, and that they should be sure she ate something, because she'd gone too long without and her body had forgotten how. And then the dark of the burned road took him, and that is the last that any soul of our kingdom ever saw of the single most important person in our history, a tired, ragged human walking south, who did not believe he had done anything at all, and who could not be made to understand, by any words we possessed, that he had done the one thing none of us could. I went also to the small voices, because a chronicler who gathers only kings and chancellors has gathered only half a truth, and the smaller half is usually the more honest. The one I will set down here belongs to a weaver named Bess, a widow of this same war, because she stands for something that the great ones could not show me, the kingdom's heart, the common grief, the relationship between the people and the myth that I and Grier had built over the dead girl's empty grave. Bess had lost her husband at the Hallows, in the same breaking of the same line, an ordinary soldier given to the same field, sung as one of the glorious dead beside the princess he had died near. And in the 11 months that followed, Bess had done what tens of thousands like her had done. She had taken her unbearable private grief and laid it down at the foot of the princess's shrine, where it became part of something vast and shared and almost beautiful. The dead princess had given Bess's dead husband meaning. He had not just died in a muddy gap in a war his betters had chosen. He had fallen beside the sacred martyr, in a holy cause, for a saint who watched over them all now from beyond. Bess prayed at that shrine every day. She told me she could not have survived the loss without it. The dead princess was the vessel into which a whole kingdom poured its grief so that the grief would not drown them one by one in their separate homes. And then the princess came back alive, and Bess told me this with shame, and with honesty I did not deserve to receive. Bess was not only glad. She was glad, she insisted, of course she was glad. A living girl is better than a dead one. Only a monster would not be glad. But underneath the gladness, in a place she was ashamed to look at, something had also collapsed. Because if the princess had not truly died at the Hallows, then the holy thing Bess had built around her husband's death began, quietly, to come apart. He had not fallen beside a martyr. He had fallen beside a girl who lived. The shrine that had held Bess's grief was suddenly a shrine to no one, an empty tomb, a lie in stone. And the meaning she had so painfully constructed around her own loss, the meaning that had let her get up each morning, wobbled and threatened to fall, and she had to face, all over again, the rawer and lonelier truth that her husband had simply died, ordinarily, in an ordinary breach, in a war he need not have fought. I set Bess down here because she is the answer to the question Grier would ask me, the question I will come to, the question of whether the stranger did the kingdom a mercy or a cruelty. Bess is both answers at once. The living princess took something from Bess even as the kingdom rejoiced, and I think in the end that Bess would still rather have the truth. She told me she would, fiercely, through tears, but I will not pretend the truth came to her as pure gift. It came as the truth comes, heavier than the lie and worth more and harder to carry. Now the hard, great voices. Now the ones who, if they were honest, would have preferred her dead, and one of whom was honest enough to say so to my face. I went to Lord Grier, the war-chancellor in his last years, when his faction was broken and his power was gone and he had nothing further to protect, and I expected him to deny everything, the order, the timing, the murder that was not a murder, and he did not deny a word of it. That is the thing about Grier that I am bound, as an honest chronicler, to set down, because a man who paints his villain simple is only a different kind of liar. Grier did not deny that the order to fall away had come too fast. He did not deny that a dead Rowan had been a gift to the very policies a living Rowan opposed. He sat across from me in the wreckage of his old age, and he made his case, calmly, fluently, without heat, the way a man recites an argument he has made to himself 10,000 times in the long, sleepless dark, and I am going to give it to you in full, because you have a right to hear it, and because it is a great deal harder to answer than I wished it to be when I came to his door hating him. A living princess, Grier said, is a person, and a person is a flawed, willful, divisive, mortal, changeable thing, one opinion among many, an obstacle as often as an ally, a creature who ages and errs and disappoints and dies. But a dead princess is not a person. A dead princess is a symbol, and a symbol is perfect and incorruptible and eternal. A symbol does not argue with your policy. A symbol does not marry the wrong lord or lose her nerve in a hard hour or grow into a queen who undoes everything you built. A symbol unites where a person divides. In the 11 months that Rowan was dead, Grier told me, she did more for the kingdom than she had done in all her living years combined. She fused the warring factions into one grieving whole. She steadied the shaky throne of her untested young brother. She gave a frightened and bleeding people something pure to believe in and to fight for and to die for. Dead, he said, she was the greatest queen we never had. And the stranger, in carrying her home alive, had not saved the princess. He had killed the symbol. He had reached his soft foreign hands into the one perfect, unifying, incorruptible thing the kingdom possessed, and dragged it back down into being a mere person again, divisive, mortal, fallible, ordinary. And within a single season of her return, the war that her martyrdom had been holding together had come apart at every seam. And tens of thousands who had been glad to die for a dead saint discovered they were not willing to die for a living woman. And the realm had spasmed and nearly torn itself apart. And was that, Greer asked me, his ancient eyes perfectly steady, was that in truth a mercy to the kingdom? Or was it a mercy only to one family, purchased with the stability of millions? I had no clean answer for him in that room, and I have no clean answer for him now, writing this in the dark, and I will not insult you by pretending I do. I will only tell you what I have come to see, which is that Greer was speaking the rule of the sundered carried all the way to the end of its own logic. The logic that says the lost are worth more given to the field than dragged back from it, that a clean and perfect song is worth more than a messy and complicated life, that the symbol outranks the person. It is our wisdom. It is genuinely our wisdom, the same wisdom that has saved our armies for 1,000 years, only followed past the battlefield and into the throne room, where it curdles. And the stranger, the human, was the living, walking, exhausted refusal of that entire logic, a creature who had never heard it, who would have found it obscene, for whom one messy living person apologizing for being heavy was worth more than the most flawless song ever sung over the most beautiful tomb ever sealed. Two understandings of what the lost are owed. Greer's understanding built and held a kingdom. Caleb's understanding carried one girl 100 leagues home on his back. I have decided, here at the end, which of the two I will die believing in. But I have set down Greer's case in its full strength, because I was a man who carved the easy lie for most of my life, and the least I can do now is refuse to carve an easy truth. I went to King Tobin II, the princess's younger brother, who had been a boy of no particular ambition and certainly no expectation of a crown, until the Hallows made his sister a saint and made him, overnight, a king. He is older now, and tired in the particular way of a man who has held a thing he never wanted, and he spoke to me with a gentleness that I think only the genuinely reluctant powerful ever possess. The day Rowan came back, he told me, was the most joyful and most ruinous day of his life, and he had never managed to separate the two halves of it. Joyful, because he had loved his sister with his whole heart and had mourned her with his whole heart, and now, impossibly, the grave was empty and she was breathing and in his arms. And ruinous, because in the same instant his entire reign became a fraud. He had been crowned upon her death. His legitimacy, his throne, the loyalty of his lords, all of it rested on her being gone. The moment she walked back through the gate, every man at court began silently to do the arithmetic. She was the elder, she was the true heir, she was the beloved, and she was alive. Tobin's crown, the day his sister returned, turned to glass on his head. And the cruelest part, he said, the part that he has never spoken of to anyone but me and an old scribe near death, is that for one single heartbeat, before the joy crashed in and drowned it and shamed him forever for one heartbeat, when word reached him that the stranger was at the gate with Rowan alive, a small cold voice somewhere deep in him had said no, had not wanted it, had wanted for that one black instant to keep the crown and the dead sister both. And he has hated that heartbeat in himself ever since, and atoned for it ever since, and it is the reason, he is sure it is the reason, that when the lords began quietly to suggest that the returned princess might be an impostor, a foreign trick, a thing best quietly disbelieved, King Tobin crushed the suggestion with a fury that frightened his own court. He knew his sister. He would not, he told me, having felt that one heartbeat of wanting her gone, compounded by even pretending to doubt that she had come home. He gave her back her name himself, before the whole court on his knees. It cost him his certainty and very nearly his crown, and he told me it was the only thing he had ever done as king that he was entirely unashamed of. The Queen Mother, Cordelia, I went a nearly last among the great ones, because hers was the voice I most feared, and because what had been done to her was the cruelest thing in this whole cruel account, and I did not know if she would consent to speak of it at all. She did consent. She is made of harder and finer stuff than either of her children, I have come to think, and she spoke to me with a directness that only the very old and the very bereaved can afford. The worst day of her life, she told me, was not the day they brought her word that Rowan was dead. The worst day of her life was the day at the gate, the day Rowan came home. And she said this to me without a flicker of shame, because she had decided long ago to be honest about it, the way the deepest grief eventually burns away every reason to lie. Because, she explained, she had done the unspeakable, unnatural work that no parent should ever have to do. She had buried her child. Not the body, there was no body, but the child herself in her own heart, which is the only place the burying truly happens. She had walked the entire length of that black tunnel. She had laid her daughter down inside herself and closed the cold ground over her, and after 11 months, had reached the faint, terrible, hard-won far end of the tunnel where a parent begins, in shame and in necessity, to live again on the other side of the grief. She had nearly finished the most difficult thing a living creature is ever asked to do. And then a stranger walked up to a gate in the gray hour and, in a single instant, undid every step of it. Gave her daughter back alive. Yes, real, yes, joy beyond joy, yes. But in the very same motion tore open the closed ground, unmade 11 months of agonized healing, and worst of all, handed back to her the absolute certainty that she would now have to do it all again. That she would have to lose Rowan a second time, someday, as we lose everyone, to the war or the world, or the simple frailty of a body that the stranger had bought a little more time but could not make immortal, and that when that day came, Cordelia would have to walk the entire black tunnel a second time, having already walked it once. The stranger gave her back her daughter, and in doing so gave her back the guarantee of a second grief. And she has never, she told me, been able to decide whether to bless that human or curse him. She thinks she will go to her own grave still unable to decide, holding the blessing and the curse together in the same hand, the way you hold a thing too large and too heavy to ever set down. That is the part the song will never tell. That is the part the black wall cannot hold. That bringing a person back from the dead is not a clean gift, that it is also unavoidably a wound, that the stranger in his small, stubborn human refusal to leave a living thing in a field did not hand our kingdom a simple miracle but a vast entangled complication. A grief reopened, a war undone, a perfect symbol murdered, a young king's crown turned to glass, a weaver's painful meaning collapsed, 100 hard, messy, true human things. Because that is precisely what living people are, complications, and that, I have finally understood, is the deepest reason the powerful and the wise so often, so quietly prefer them dead. And Rowan herself. I will end with her, though hers is the thinnest voice in my whole gathering, because she speaks of it least of anyone alive, and I have learned, sitting with her, when to stop pushing and simply let the silence be her testimony. She did not come home to a homecoming. She came home to her own tomb. She walked when she was strong enough to walk, through a kingdom that had spent 11 months perfecting her into a saint and a banner and a holy cause, and she had to stand before all of it, scarred, hollowed, starved, mortal, ordinary, and watch her people's faces fall. Because she could see it, she told me, in the one long conversation she ever allowed me on the subject. She could see the flicker behind their eyes, the disappointment they were ashamed of and could not quite hide. The living woman could not possibly measure up to the perfect dead one they had built in her absence. She had died a flawless thing and come back a flawed one, and a part of the kingdom never truly forgave her for it, never forgave her for being a person where they had needed a symbol, for breathing where they had wanted a saint. She spent the first year of her second life, she said, feeling like a ghost haunting her own legend, a stranger to the story of herself, unable to find any connection between the radiant, martyred princess of the war banners and the frightened, broken, apologizing woman whom a foreigner had carried out of a field on his back, because she would not stop saying sorry for being heavy. But she made a choice in the end, and that choice is the one thing the song and the black wall and my secret true account all finally agree upon, because it was too large and too public and too consequential to lie about. She refused the saint. She stood up in the great hall, scarred and plain and unmistakably alive, and she told the kingdom to its face that the dead princess it so loved had never existed, that she was only ever a woman, flawed and willful and mortal, and that she would not allow her own false death to go on feeding a war she had opposed with her living breath. And she ended it. The kingdom did not know what to make of one who had been sundered and had come back. They feared her a little, the way you fear a thing that has crossed a boundary that is supposed to be one way, and that fear was a strange and terrible kind of authority. Rowan spent every last scrap of it. She spent the awe of her own impossible return, all of it, to stop the war that her martyrdom had begun, and she stopped it, and tens of thousands who would otherwise have died did not die, and that, in the end, is what the stranger truly carried out of the field that day. Not a princess, a peace. He simply never knew it. He never stayed to learn it. And I think, if you could find him on whatever road he is still walking, and tell him that the tired girl he wouldn't put down ended a war and saved a generation, he would look at you with that same baffled plainness and say that he hadn't done anything, that she'd done it herself, and had we remembered to make sure she ate something. I am the one they ordered to write the lie, and I wrote it, and it is on the black wall, beautiful and false, and it will outlast me by 1,000 years. But here is the truth, gathered from all the voices, set down where no wall will ever carry it, by an old coward making the only restitution left to him. The princess was not given to the field. A stranger refused to give her. Our kingdom's deepest and most ancient wisdom declared her already dead, already a song, already owed nothing further by the living, and a tired human from beyond the rim, who had never heard that wisdom and would have named it a horror, lifted her out of a closed gap and carried her 100 leagues north across a season of war, because she was alive and apologizing for being heavy. And you do not, he said, you simply do not leave behind someone who is using the last of their strength to apologize for being heavy. He did not think he had done anything. That is the part I cannot get past, even now, even at the very end of my life and my ink. He carried a peace, and a complication, and a reopened grief, and a murdered symbol, and a king's glass crown, and a weaver's collapsed meaning, and a living, breathing, ordinary woman, 100 leagues across burned country on his ruined back. And he handed the whole impossible tangle of it to an old gate guard in the gray hour, and said, I think this one's yours. And he would not take a coin or a crumb of glory for it. And he walked back out into the dark genuinely, completely, unshakably convinced that he had done nothing worth remembering. We are a wise people. I want that to be the second to last thing written here, because it is true and because I love my people. We have a hard, clean, sacred custom for the lost, and it has served us faithfully for 1,000 years, and it lets us fold our most unbearable grief into a single beautiful word and go on living. The humans do not have that wisdom. What they have instead is a kind of stubborn, exhausting, magnificent foolishness that will not let a living thing be written off, that does not seem to know how to set a person down once it has picked them up, that would rather shoulder the heavy, complicated, apologizing mess of an actual life, and carry it 100 leagues home than leave it in a field to become a clean and perfect song. I used to believe with my whole heart that our way was the wiser of the two. I have changed my mind here at the end, alone, writing the truth in the dark that no one ordered and no one will praise. A song is a beautiful thing to bury someone in. I have carved a great many of them, But a song never once walked out of a burned field on a stranger's back in the gray hour, scarred and starving and alive, apologizing for being heavy. His name was Caleb. He said he hadn't done anything. He said to make sure that she ate something. It is the only true thing carved nowhere in all the kingdom, and it is the only thing I needed to leave behind.